Folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Have you figured it out yet that it's probably long overdue that we kind of separate ourselves from the world that we live in? I know that many of you already kind of think that way, but it is something that I've talked about pretty often on here, and I call it cultural secession. I know that that word has been used to define other things in the past, and people kind of look at secession meaning, governments, leaving other governments, like in the, what happened here in America a century and a half ago. But I believe that it's very much a thing that we can do, that we can kind of separate ourselves and kind of secede from this culture. And I'm going to give you a good example of what I mean by that here in a minute, talking about what's going on in public schools, and just it's one more piece in the puzzle that shows how they view folks like you and I, and how the power of the government is being used to extinguish and to seek out and to demonize, opposition, and to the point that it's, I think that we're following in the steps of what could lead up to a type of genocide. And we'll explain that here in just a little bit. I also want to talk about, you get a twofer today, how to make your homestead more self-sufficient from the perspective of, from prepping, because I think that there's kind of two different perspectives going on there. And when I talk about self-sufficiency on your homestead, I'm talking about what if, society really collapsed? What if the supply chains completely collapse? And what if you are left on your homestead to pretty much survive on your own for the most part? And I'll talk about some ideas and tips on how to do that. I want to talk about something that's been in the news for the last, 24, 48 hours. There was if you haven't heard this is, listen up. And I know some of you are homeschoolers, so you may think this doesn't apply to you, but it does. Looks like it's going to rain on me. That's all right. I'm not that sweet. I won't melt. So the Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General, has issued a memo to the FBI to investigate, use the full scope of their authority to look into and investigate any perceived threats of violence or intimidation being done by parents of children towards school board members. There's been a lot kind of hit and miss over the past year or so in the news about what's going on in these school boards. Parents of these children are finally starting to kind of wake up and grow a little bit of courage, and they're going into the school board meetings and they're standing up. Typically in the United States, at least for the past few decades, school board meetings are kind of dull and boring, and not a whole lot of people show up to them. And they pretty much just do what they want, the school board that is, and without a whole lot of opposition from parents. But that has started to change, and we're seeing parents go in and voice their opposition to mandates for this, critical race theory, some of the books that are being put in that promote alternative lifestyles and various different gender, whatever identities and stuff, and to the point that some of these books are quite pornographic. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. They are horrible. I'm not going to go into the details because I like to keep this channel family friendly, but you can just imagine, if you don't know, and you can look it up on your own, the horrid things that they're putting in these schools now. And so parents are going and they're kind of raising a ruckus. And I'm sure many of you have watched these videos from school board meetings where parents are just irate at what is going on, and they're standing up and speaking out and trying to hold the school board meeting accountable for what's going on in these schools. So anyways, the left doesn't like that, and they don't like having opposition to their ideas. They just don't like that. They want you to just fall in line and accept what they tell you to do and accept what they tell you to think. And so the Attorney General has now issued this memo, and it's just one page. But the memo basically says that you have the authority to the FBI. The FBI now has the authority and permission from the Attorney General and basically ordering them to go out and to investigate any of these cases where parents are potentially intimidating and to the point possibly even threatening school boards. There, of course, it also mentions violence, but you know what? That's a given. I don't think you really need the FBI doing that. I'm not aware of very many cases in probably American history where parents have gone in and committed acts of violence towards school board members. It's possible that it's happened, but I doubt that it's been very much. And if it happens, well, there's laws already in place, and there's local law enforcement that can most definitely take care of those investigations and prosecute those crimes. But intimidation and threats is a little bit different, because those can be very vague terms that can be interpreted differently depending on which side that you stand on. And people that are voicing their opposition and demanding changes, well, I mean, that could be considered, opposition and threats. And so, and intimidation. So this is just one more thing, folks. If you are still keeping your children in public schools, I don't know how much more I can say to encourage you to not do that. I understand the difficulty. I was homeschooled myself. My parents chose to take me out of school to homeschool me, and I have homeschooled my children, so I understand it. I get it. It makes things more complicated. But what is more important in your life than your children? And I'm telling you, you've got to get your children out of these places. We've been talking for years and for decades of the amount of indoctrination that's going on in these schools, and it's reached an all-time high to a point that I'm not really sure much education is really even going on in these schools anymore. It really doesn't even appear that way. I want to show you a clip of a guy named Terry McCullough. I think that's his name. I may have his name kind of off, but looks like I'm going to get rained on pretty good. The sun is shining over here, and I'm getting poured on over here. He's running for governor of Virginia. And a couple of days ago, he was in a debate against a couple other people that are running also for governor. And I want you to listen to what they're saying about schools, because that subject was brought up in the debate, and about parents having the right to actually go in and control what's being taught to their children and vote to remove books from libraries and curriculum and have an actual say in what's being done. I want you to listen to this guy, and of course he's opposed to that. And why I'm playing this is because this is a very good example of the mentality that we're dealing with on the far left. Again, we're not talking about Republican versus Democrat. We're talking about far left, globalist, communist, mentality versus freedom. Just listen to what he says here.
I'm not going to let parents come into schools and actually take books out and make their own decision.
You vetoed it.
So, yeah, I've stopped the bill that I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
Parents shouldn't have the right to choose what's being taught to their children. Parents shouldn't have the right to choose what their children are reading and learning. Leave that up to the government, because we know what's best for your children. We don't want to rely on parents. I mean, since when does a parent know what's best for their child? Leave it up to us. Trust the government. Just trust us. We're way smarter than you. We have more resources than you. We have a greater idea of what's really necessary for your children. So just trust us and shut up. That's basically what we're being told. All right, I got a little bit out of the rain into the canopy of the trees. That helps a little bit. It's for really pouring. So we're being told that to just shut up. You don't know what's best for your children. We do. If this is not a case for seceding from society as a people, of stepping away and stepping outside of it and removing our children from it, and finding other like-minded individuals to be around, I don't know what is. I know there's all kinds of arguments. Well, your child, they won't be socialized as well. You know what? I don't want my child socialized around that. I don't want my children being around the stuff that they're being taught in schools. I don't want my child being around other children that think that their parents and the children themselves think that way. I don't want it. Okay? My child is just fine being socialized around us and around other families that we kind of choose for them to be around. So, folks, this is the mentality. I've said it on here many times before. They want to eliminate us. They it's not that they want to win political power. They want to eliminate us. They want to demonize us as the enemy. They want to cast us out of society as the enemy, and paint this, like terrorist type of title on us, because that's basically what they're doing here with the FBI investigating parents that go to these school board meetings. They're likening them to terrorists. It's not a good thing. Now, I want to shift gears drastically to homesteading, because a lot of people have some questions and are trying to do this. And they're trying to do this not from a way of what would be considered popularized homesteading, but to do this from a way of truly preparedness and self-sufficiency minded. If you haven't heard, I have started a new website that is kind of like a Facebook. It's a social media website. It's a network. And it works very much like a Facebook or something like that. There's a link down in the description below. It's an invite link that you can go there and join up. And there's almost 1,000 people there already. And there's lots and lots of good conversations, various little subgroups, and it's pretty cool. Anyways, so there's been some questions over there asked about, how to raise animals and do different things on the homestead from the perspective of what happens if everything collapses and you can't get the resupplies and stuff that you need. So how do you come up with animal feed and the resources that we would normally use, on a homestead? And so there are ways to do that. A lot of the homesteading movement today centers around it just being, ecological, kind of reconnecting with nature, peaceful, improving the health of your lifestyle and stuff. And those are all very important, and they're all very true, and they're all aspects of why we do what we're doing. But a lot of times the information that you get on homesteading from those sources don't talk about homesteading from a preparedness standpoint of doing it from a vantage point of what if the whole world around you is collapsing and you're trying to survive on your homestead. And so what I tell people is when you're building your homestead, and maybe you've already been on it for years, but whatever you're doing on the homestead, try to look at it through the lens and ask yourself this question: what would I do if my homestead, my family and my homestead was cut off from the rest of the world? How would I make this work? Now, it's not that I necessarily plan or believe that something would happen that would cut us off from the rest of the world. But if I try to look through it in those lenses, it kind of helps me, adjust my plans a little bit. Maybe, the size of something or the location that I would place it on the property, or how I would prepare for it, or how I would do it, or what animals. It all kind of, it helps me determine maybe a different path of homesteading. And so let me give you some examples. For instance, chickens. Chickens are great for homestead. Every homestead should have chickens, and chickens are very popular. Backyard chickens, people use them as pets. It's all kinds of stuff. These things they've become so domesticated because of the vast popularity of raising chickens. And that's good, but it's also bad. It's also caused a lot of chicken varieties to kind of be a little too docile. They've become pets. And a lot of the information out there on raising chickens is based on this concept of them being pets that you get eggs from. And from a homesteading perspective, especially one that you're trying to create a homestead that can withstand, SHTF, the apocalypse, some of these varieties and these ways that people raise chickens just aren't going to work. So when we're looking at chickens, number one, as far as the type of variety of breed, I don't really care what they look like. I don't care how cute they are. I don't care about the color of them. And I'm not too caring about how gentle they are and how much they can be held and how much they like humans. What I'm looking for a really hardy breed, something that's very disease resistant, something that can handle various weather, I'm looking for something that is very self-sufficient on their own, meaning that they can forage real well. They can kind of take care of themselves for the most part. That they can raise their own young, hatch them out and raise them, that the roosters do a real good job of protecting and alerting the flock. I'm really just looking for chickens that kind of take care of themselves. And I don't even care so much if they're heavy layers. You know, all chickens lay eggs. They all lay eggs, and some much more than others. And most, even your average laying chicken, you know, chicken that lays eggs, which they all do, is usually adequate enough in a survival scenario. You know, I'm not looking to, in that perspective, to have some business where I'm selling dozens of eggs every day. I'm just looking for enough to keep my family going with eggs and occasionally have some meat to eat. So I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to look for breeds and do some research into ones that are really hardy, that they can take care of themselves. And that the roosters have actually a little bit of aggression, you know, because they're little kids in the backyard chicken thing and holding them and petting them and people putting little dresses on them and collars and ridiculous stuff. People are looking for roosters that are extremely gentle and docile. Well, the problem with that sometimes is that you get a rooster that's so docile that they're not actually good at protecting the flock. They may breed, but they're not really good at protecting, and that's really the big reason of why you want a rooster. And so you want something that has a little bit of aggression to it. Doesn't mean it has to be mean and fighting all the time, but you want something that's a little tough and that's alert and that's willing to kind of stand and kind of fight off a threat. And so I'm looking for something like that. Usually kind of a medium-sized bird kind of works the best. No, you're not going to end up getting some big fat chicken broiler if you butcher it, but you'll certainly get meat from it. As far as like feeding it, you know, in most cases, and this also obviously is going to vary depending on the location that you're at, in most parts of the country, if you free range your chickens and have enough space to free range them, they pretty much can take care of themselves in eating, especially through the spring and the summer months. And during those months, you really, if you're free ranging them, you really don't have to feed them to keep them alive. You're really just feeding them to increase the egg production. But if they're outside most of their time, and like ours, they stay in the coop at night and during the day they're outside, they're going to find enough to eat to keep themselves alive. And because of the climate that we're living in, there's really only a few weeks out of the year that they probably just can't find enough stuff to eat. And that's when it's in the heart of the wintertime, dead of winter, and there's snow and ice on the ground. But even in the wintertime, while it does, the food certainly thins out, they're still pecking and eating stuff all over the place. And so so if you look at it from that perspective, you really don't have to feed them as much as most people do. Most of us, we feed our chickens what we do to get an increased egg production, and that's really about it. There are also ways that you can raise a lot of your own food. It may not be the fancy stuff that you buy in the store, but along with their foraging, raising like mealworms and then growing certain grains that produce a lot in a small amount of space, like amaranth, even some wheat varieties can produce quite a bit. You know, a regular wheat will produce up to 3,000 pounds of wheat in 1 acre if it's properly grown. Certain sunflower seeds or sunflower plants produce a lot of seed. And there's a few other plants like that. And then there's also wild stuff that you can harvest. There's a lot of wild plants around that produce a lot of seed or that can be stored up, wild grasses and wild weeds that can be stored and fed to the chickens. So there are a lot of varieties. The same concept that I just told you on chickens can be applied to all livestock. There's a lot of livestock out there that make a great modern homestead. But if that homestead was cut off from the rest of the world and you weren't able to get all the medicines that you need and maybe had to do things naturally, or the animal pretty much, was going to have to fend for itself for the most part or be more of a rugged animal, a lot of these breeds may not work. So research, your goats, your sheep, your cattle, and others, and try to figure out through the research, because you can find it out there, of which breeds tend to be better. For instance, our breed of sheep, they're not a heritage breed of sheep. They are a primitive breed of sheep. which means their lineage goes much further back, and they're extremely hardy sheep. They pretty much just take care of themselves. And the same way with feeding them. If you break your field into paddocks and rotate it, allowing different areas to kind of regrowth from the animal grazing on it, you can provide food for them just that's growing much longer. And then, of course, you know, if you want to take care of them completely on your own, you're going to have to figure out how much land you need for hay for the winter time. And that's going to be the biggest thing. And you may even have to do things the old-fashioned way, where you're cutting it by hand with a sickle, where you're, you know, stacking it or making hay stacks the old-fashioned way. This was done once before. We didn't always live in this modern high-tech world, and so it can be done. Taking the same principles that I've just said with animals and apply it also to gardening. Is your manner of gardening only sustainable if you have the ability to use resources off of your farm? Electricity, water, gas maybe. Some people may heat greenhouses with gas, continually adding, you know, different things into your soil. Or is your garden pretty much on its own? That's why I've advocated for permaculture, because eventually with permaculture, you can build your garden up to where it pretty much takes care of itself. There's very little that you have to do with it. So the point is to try to look at your homestead, whether it's out in the middle of nowhere or in a city suburb or whatever, and try to look at things that you can do to set it up in a way so that it's sustaining on its own and that you're not having to put a lot into it. Because we live in such a modern world, and so many things, tips, and advice are based on these modern ideas that it makes it difficult for people when they're trying to build a homestead that can withstand societal and you know, supply chain and economic collapses. And so if those things do happen, and the odds of them happening are constantly increasing, we need to be able to take care of our own. And of course, along the way, we're going to be trading and bartering and working with our neighbors. So anyways, I just wanted to put some of those thoughts into your mind as you're building your homestead, as you're choosing how to house them, where to put them on the property, and even what breeds and varieties of animals and plants to put on your property, because it is very important. All right, folks, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.